Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mary Beth Goodsell. I'm the eClaims Program Manager. Also with me is Mike Hunter from our Customer Support Unit. I ask that you keep your phone on mute. We have everyone mute upon entry, and we'll be using the chat feature today to answer questions. We have 133 slides to get through in these 2 hours. If you're not comfortable asking questions through chat, we'll be providing an email address at the end of the presentation that you can send us your questions. At this point, I am going to turn it over to Mike Hunter.
Thank you, Mary Beth. First, we want to welcome everyone for coming today to hear about our change to the Release 3.1. The agenda today, we're going to go over very briefly some Release 3.0 news while everyone's here, some changes recently announced for 3.0. We'll also do a brief highlight of the board's Business Information System project. You'll hear the term BIS used later on, BIS. Go over the most important thing today, and that's the Release 3.1 implementation plan, as well as the requirements for 3.1, and just the next steps after the presentation as well. You already heard Mary Beth's voice, and many of you are familiar with her. As you can see, she's been with the board for over 35 years. Was part of the original 3.0 implementation team. And she's also currently a member of the IAIABC Claims Systems and Steering Committees. New York has been with the EDI Council since 2017. She just finished a co-vice chair of the Claims Committee and was awarded the IAIABC Outstanding Achievement EDI Award in 2018. For myself, I've been with the board since 2004. I actually started as an investigator and then moved over into the claims and eClaims units. Since then, I currently am one of the managers of the board's customer support unit, basically the board's help desk currently. I was originally part of the 3.0 implementation, and I am now one of the business leads for the 3.1 implementation. And as part of that, I'm also a member of the claims and system committees. The learning objectives today, as we mentioned, we're moving to Release 3.1. That's part of the IAIABC Claims EDI standard, and we want to list the New York State specific changes within that process today. Mary Beth later on, time permitting, will also show you a couple of the handouts that she had sent to all attendees. We're also going to describe the timeline implementation plan, as well as just define how to find more information and additional support materials. The other thing I just want to mention very briefly is during this presentation, you will hear the term proposed regulations mentioned. Those regulations have not been posted yet. They will be posted in the near future. So we would just ask folks if you have a comment regarding the proposed regulation, if any are mentioned during this presentation, to save those, and there will be a comment period once those regulations are posted. Today's takeaways, the most important thing to take away from today is our implementation date for Release 3.1 is March 15th, 2021. That is when we are moving to Release 3.1. We encourage everyone to register for the monthly webinars. In addition to training webinars, we do monthly webinars, and we'll cover a couple topics from 3.1, as well as any 3.0 news during those webinars. And to have a readiness plan. Prepare for migration to 3.1, modify your program, and as Mary Beth mentioned, if you have any questions at all for Release 3.0, you'll continue to use eClaims mailbox. For Release 3.1, we have a specific mailbox for you now, eclaims31@wcb.ny.gov that you may use.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about current 3.0. I mean, our focus today is definitely 3.1, but we have a few slides here as reminders of 3.0. We still have 10 months left of 3.0 processing. We did add the new nature of injury, cause of injury codes for COVID-19, effective 4/1/2020, codes 83. We do ask that you file SROI-02s to update the nature and the cause of injury codes. If you didn't use the codes, we had noticed that the accident narrative field had been used frequently for replacement on these codes. And this supports our element requirement table in 3.0, which lists both of these DNs as a Y, which means that an O2 should be filed if these data elements change. We did announce that we will be applying a new population restriction on October 1st. This was posted on our eClaims changelog on March 26th to allow at least 6 months for coding. We are only going to be applying an edit for the date of injury must be on or after 2019 if the nature of injury or the cause of injury is the 83. We had announced that we were also going to be setting an edit on type of loss, requiring it to be an O2, but we pulled that. So we are not going to be setting an edit on type of loss, only on date of injury. This is just a reminder that we did put into production the edit on 5/1/2020 that we had previously announced on our eClaims changelog on November 1st, covered it on our December 17th eClaims Trading Partner webinar. So initial date disability began. The condition was modified to include claim type P. The reason for this is that this will now require claim administrators to send the initial date disability began anytime there's lost time, even if it's 1 day or more. The other edit that we implemented last week was on the benefit payment issue date, and we modified the population restriction to include SROIs so that the benefit payment issue date, listing a future date, could not be more than 4 days from the filing of the suspension. We also updated our FAQ on April 28th. This is the one that talks about referencing a document on a CB or CA in compliance with Rule 323A. So we had originally posted this FAQ in November. We presented it at the December 17th webinar. Trading partners requested clarification. So we did go to our general counsel and our directors, and we were able to get some clarification on your questions, and it must be filed within 3 days of the CB or the CA. So we changed that a little bit. Originally it said it has to be on the same day, but the letter of correspondence must be filed within 3 days of the CB or the CA, indicating the document numbers and the date of the supporting documentation. IME is the most common, along with a summary of the findings within those documents, explaining the reason that the change of the payment rate or benefit type code. Then if the CA or CB is rejected, then it should be submitted within 5 days. We also were able to get clarification that the letter of correspondence reference can be either mailed or emailed to WCB claims filing at wcb.ny.gov. So it's important to note that this compliance process is being viewed as a short-term solution. We opened an IRR, which is an issue resolution request with the IAIABC Claims Committee. We've asked for new data elements for a benefit change reason code on the CB or CA, so you won't have to continue to send us paper in 3.1. We are getting some pushback on this. We formed, a work group was formed and meeting every Thursday. We do encourage you to join the work group If you are an IABC member, you can email Greg Lutz, glutz@iaiabc.org if you're interested. If you're not an IABC member, please email our eClaims mailbox with suggestions on the new benefit change reason codes. Even though if you're not an IA member, we're still interested in hearing from you because we really understand that sending in that core with every CB and CA is cumbersome, and we are trying to get some benefit change reason codes added to the standard for claim administrators. I know that some of you are IABC members, but not claims EDI committee members. I just want to note that the IA opened up their claims EDI committee membership this week. Normally they only have it open in November, but they did open it up this week, and they are accepting applications until May 15th. It's on their website under their committee membership, and you can email Heather Laurie if you have any questions. But we do encourage you to join us in trying to get this new data element added to the standard so we can get away from requiring the paper filing for the CBs and the CAs. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike.
The next topic we'd like to talk about is the business information, the BIS project. This is really what's driving the change with EDI, and EDI is a very important piece of that. So the BIS project is our largest and final piece of our business process reengineering program. We will be building a new claim system that will actually replace our multiple legacy paper-based claim systems with a single web-based platform. And this change to eClaim's release 3.1, that upgrade really provides the foundation for the data pillars for that BIS project. So there are two phases to the implementation of Release 3.1. The largest and most important is the Release 3.1 upgrade. That will be incorporated into our current WCB claim system. It'll be an early adoption in March of 2021 for all trading partners. As many of you know, we posted the tables in March of this year. With that, we post them on our website. And also, I just wanted to point out that when we post them on our website, for those that are IAIABC members, we also post those typically in the EDI general interest, as well as the jurisdictional news online communities as well. After the March 2021 implementation, there will be a smaller revision. As you know, changes are made occasionally to the standard. That revision will be concurrent with the BIS project go live. There'll be smaller changes and adjustments to the standard based on our implementation needs. And that implementation at this point is planned for 2022 for all trading partners. Just to show you a timeline of where we're at. You'll notice that right now we publish those tables. We've been doing the webinars, and we've been through the IAIABC table review already. Shortly, we will start reaching out to folks about testing. And with that, we're going to test with a few select trading partners early. And after that, we'll have 3 different waves of trading partner onboarding up until March 2021. The other important thing to think about while implementing is the legacy claim transition plan. Very similar to Release 3. This transition is just for paper to the IAIABC Claims Release 3.1 using the SROI and SROI UR. That UR is grandfathered in and would be effective upon New York's implementation of Claims Release 3.1. And the legacy claim instructions are located on the WCB website.
Okay, now we're going to start talking about the New York requirements for 3.1. So we do plan on adopting the standard effective March 15, 2021. We're going to talk a little bit about the different tables, the event table, the element requirement table, the edit matrix. And we created a document called Summary of Claims Release 3 to 3.1 Table Changes for New York State. It was attached to the email blast that we sent to all registrants yesterday. We will be referencing this document throughout the presentation, so hopefully you have that handy to walk through it. We're not here to train on the IABC standard. As I said earlier, I know some of you are IABC members and you have a copy of the IA implementation guide and you're familiar with the standard. We're just here to explain how New York plans on utilizing it. The IABC does have extensive training materials out on their site. In fact, they do plan on hosting a virtual training session June 2nd to 3rd. So if you're not familiar with the standard, you can go out there and register for this training or other kind of virtual type training that they offer. It's on their website on the event and education page. So in the standard, there were some new maintenance type codes, MTCs, that were introduced for 3.1. We do plan on adopting 2 of them. One that we plan on adopting is the SROI-AC, and that should only be filed if indemnity ceases prior to your acquisition. So this is part of the Section 4 Acquired Claim Processing Rules in the IABC, and it's intended to report indemnity paid by a prior claim administrator where that suspension was not reported prior to the claim transfer. So this has been an ongoing problem for New York, and we're looking for the AC to be a resolution to the issue. We don't see that any changes are needed to our existing 300.23 because it's already covered in there that we need the suspension. What we'll be doing is we'll be returning DN 410 acquisition status code on the acknowledgments when the AQ and the AU is submitted. The SROI-AC is required for mailing, as listed on the event table, and the requirement on the SROI-AC for DN 493 is acquired claim last known indemnity through date. So following along with the DP rule, it is required unless the employer paid salary prior to acquisition is present. So when we return the acquisition status code of B, SROI due on the AQ or the AU, the claim administrator must notify the board that payments are not being made within 16 days and file the AC. If you are still paying on the claim, then you would file an AP, and these are listed on the event table. We understand that Minnesota will also be implementing this in August. The other, I think, 8 states who have already implemented Release 3.1 have not adopted this MTC, so Minnesota will be the first state to adopt it in August, and then we'll be adopting it in March in a very similar manner as Minnesota. The sync up is the second maintenance type code that's new to 3.1 that we will be accepting, and it's to be filed when the claim administrator has identified some missing or delayed transactions due to issues. And it's only going to be accepted when it's been granted by the eClaims work group. So the sender must file an email with the eClaims work group for approval. Then we'll go through a process and try to get you to file all the appropriate MTCs like we do today. This is a very common problem today that we do receive emails frequently. The eClaims leadership team works with you to try to get the appropriate maintenance type codes filed. Quite often it's because the benefit type codes were left off of the SROI UR and we have edits that don't let you introduce new ones, or there's a case of a modified previous awards that you're hitting all sorts of edits. So it can't be used when another MTC is supposed to be filed. So we have restrictions on it that will only allow it to be filed upon approval. An important rule in Section 4 is the benefit period start date. It's one of the many rules of the sync-up process. The benefit period start date is the first date of the latest uninterrupted period of benefits that correspond to every BTC. The IA has a business scenario out there, 5-12-10, that you can refer to, but there are more rules in Section 4 about the sync-up process. There were a few other MTCs released in 3.1 that we will not be adopting. One is the SROI-NT narrative. We didn't find that it was a good fit for New York. Also, the PX, the partial suspension. The PX in 3.0 was never accepted, therefore we're not going to be accepting the partial suspension or the partial suspension reason codes in 3.1. Also, the SROI-UR and the SROI-UR update report designed in 3.1 is a new legacy process. And as Mike mentioned before, we have a grandfathered legacy process that will be paper to 3.1, very similar to what we had for our paper to 3.0 process. And we do have the legacy processing rule documented, updated out on our website. We're just going to go through a little knowledge check, and you feel free to answer the question through the chat. I do have a question here in chat before I get to this knowledge check. It says, how will this B SROI-DO indicator be returned on the acknowledgement or on a form? So the B SROI-DO is a data element that will be returned in the acknowledgement. So it's the first of its kind in the standard. So it will be returned in the acknowledgement. If you're a web filer, we're redesigning the web data entry application so that when you click submit and your transaction is accepted, when that PDF comes up and your SROI number, it'll print up on the screen. For flat filers, we're developing a mechanism to return it in the acknowledgement. Someone just asked me, where did you say the summary of changes document was? It is on the website under the 3.1 element requirement table page. Okay, I'll get to the knowledge check now. When should a SROI-AC be filed versus a SROI-SU? So if you want to send me your answer through chat, feel free to do so. We're just having a little quiz here. Or I'll just get the answer. So an AC should only be, oh, somebody replied here. Okay, AC, when previous TPA hasn't suspended. We have a bunch of answers here. So yes, that's correct. See about 5 or 6 here sending me that same answer, and that's correct. That's when you would file the AC. True or false, on the SROI sync-up, the benefit period start date is the first date of the latest uninterrupted period of benefit payments that corresponds to every BTC reported. True or false? True. Okay, somebody already answered, and that's right. True is correct. Very good. All right, we're going to move on to the element requirement severity. So this is not a new concept in 3.1. We just want to go over it with everyone to make sure that when they look at the element requirement table, they understand what each of these letters mean. The element requirement table in 3.1 is color-coded, though. That's new. Systems Committee of the IABC color-coded it. They have instructions on the first worksheet of the element requirement table that explains the rankings. Mandatory, M, will reject it if you don't send it. MC has certain conditions on it. You have to look at the conditions worksheet to know what the conditions are. AR, please send it to us. It says if available. We always ask you to send it if you have the information. And if you send it to us, we're going to apply edits. All the dates have edits on them. Then the population restrictions will be set, the DN error message, everything on the edit matrix, all those edits will be applied. AA means send it to us, please. But if you send it to us, there are no edits on it. A lot of those are type-in fields, nothing we can edit. That's an AA. And then not applicable means we won't display it on the paper forms or in eCase. If you send it to us, we'll just ignore it. We won't reject it, we'll just ignore it. So I also note that the element requirement table includes a worksheet in 3.1 for the changes made in the standard. So periodically, the systems committee will update the element requirement table. New York will download these changes every time they publish an update. We'll load it onto the New York website and make the appropriate changes for New York. And I'm going to turn it back to Mike.
Thank you, Mary Beth.
Oh, wait a minute, Mike, we have a question. Sorry. What's the difference between IABC set rankings and all the other rankings? Good question. So what we did on our element requirement table is we put in red, bold, the IA set rankings. So what the systems committee did was they put in some set rankings because based on the data population rule, they have some that a jurisdiction has no option to change. So those are the IABC set rankings. The color coding goes with options that a jurisdiction can set. So if you look on the table, like a green means the highest ranking we can go is, I think it's an MC. So those are set rankings by IABC that goes up with the rules and the DP rules and the Section 4 rules that limits what the jurisdictions can do. This way, jurisdictions can't make everything mandatory. They have to follow the set rankings by the systems committee from the element requirement tables. Okay, Mike.
All right, thank you, Mary Beth. We're going to start going through some of the actual New York requirements for 3.1. So this will be things such as element requirement table changes, edit matrix changes, and we'll walk you through those now. The first and most important change is part of body. You'll see the initials ERT up there. That just stands for Element Requirement Table from the IAIABC standard. So part of body, as many of you know, in 3.0, you can only send one body part. There is no left, right, and it creates confusion both on the part of claim administrators as well as the board, and sometimes makes adjudication a little tougher. So in the 3.1 standard, there is now a part of body code. It's on the SROI. It remains the same as coded in 3.0. Some of those part of body codes, and you'll probably recognize many of these, are listed on the screen here. These are all posted in the valid values table in the edit matrix. The important change to part of body is two new data elements. One of those being part of body injured location code, the SROI. You'll notice it's mandatory conditional on the OO, O4, and AU, and that condition is it's equal to one of the codes on the previous slide. Part of body injured fingers, toes, location code on the SROI. This now lets you report the actual which finger was injured. That is mandatory conditional on the OO, O4, and AU. And it's going to be required if the associated DN, data element 36, part of body injured code equals 36 fingers other than thumb or 57 toes. And per the standard, it is AR, back to the severity rankings Mary Beth just talked about on the SROI-AQ. So for DN 421, part of body injured location code. The standard added bilateral left and right. And for DN 422, part of body injured fingers, toes location code, it added numeric codes that translate to 1, 2, 3, and 4 for index finger, first toe, middle finger, second toe, ring finger, third toe, and little finger or little toe. There is also a population restriction, new edit, DN 420, error code 4445. Number of part of body injured must be greater than 0 on the SROI, except for the O1 or the SROI-AQ. The other thing we want to point out is the business uses for those that do business with the board. One of the large ones is eCase. On the SROI, that latest values tab displays those parts of body that you report. So for release 3.1, we will be modifying eCase to display those additional body parts. The other important use that's more recent is the medical portal. This information is actually displayed in the case search results for healthcare providers. So for the formulary requests, when a provider does a case search, that information is actually returned to them as part of the case search, and it'll be used for future expansion of the portal when they expand to the MG2 and C4 auths as well. With that, we just want to do another quick knowledge check. The first question, name 3 parts of body that require location codes. If you remember, on slide 30, we talked about some of those codes. It looks like we have some answers. The next question is how many location codes were added for fingers and toes? And I'm seeing a lot of answers there again. 4 is the correct answer. And this one we just talked about on a couple slides ago. What is the population restriction for number of body parts injured? I see some answers coming in, and correct. I see a few of them in there that had greater than 0 on the SROI, except for the O1 and AQ. With that, I am going to turn it over to Mary Beth to talk about the O2 change.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, the change O2 process has changed quite a bit comparing 3.0 to 3.1. So in 3.0, all we have is a Y or an N telling you, yes, we want you to file the O2, or no, you really don't have to. In 3.1, what they did was they added 3 new data elements, DN 411, 412, and 413. These are described in section 6 of the data dictionary. 411 is the number of the change data elements. You can have up to 99 changes at a time. The DP rule in section 2 for 412 explains that it shall only be sent on the O2 to communicate the data element of the segment being changed, and a DN can only be changed once in the segment. We are applying some new standard errors 123 to 126 to enforce the rule, and this is summarized on the reference document that we gave you on page 9, and it goes into more details on how we're using the edit for 412. Because 412 is a very important one. That's where you're going to put your change data element segment number. There are several section 4 rules out there that New York is going to be applying. The Section 4 Change 02 work group is something that we participate in on a weekly basis. We are going to start reviewing the financial processing rules. So we are participating in those meetings. We know that an IRR 897 was already approved to be published in the January 1st, 2021 implementation guide, and that gives jurisdictions an option on how to apply the edits. We will be recognizing only those changes that are noted in 412. That's the way that New York will be recognizing changes. IRR 903 was recently approved for groupings, but New York won't be adopting that concept because we're setting population restrictions. IRR 904 was recently approved to clarify reportable change codes of I and IG, but again, New York won't really be adopting that since we are not using those codes. Currently out to vote is IRR 905. The voting ends on May 14th for rule number 12 regarding the sequencing, and we will be applying that. So when it comes to 411 and 412, there are a lot of rules surround that that we will be applying based on the Section 4 rules. 413 is where we get into the change reason code for add, update, remove, and delete, which indicates the type of change being made. So just for those who are not familiar with the standard, an add means that the DN was previously blank or null in the database and now is being changed to a value. An update means that DN previously had a value and is being changed to another value. Remove means previously had a value and now is being changed to blank or null. And then delete is for a variable segment occurrence that's being removed in its entirety. And DNs within that segment are not required to be identified in the change variable segment to be removed. Now, for you web data entry filers, we are building all of this into our application. So you won't see all of these data elements up front. They're all going to be behind the scene, and you'll have drop downs that will allow you to add, update, remove, and delete based on the requirements that we have listed on the element requirement table. So also attached to the email yesterday was our Change 02 reference document. This is a partial screenshot of the document that we created. And we took our element requirement table, we broke it down to show only the reportable change codes that we are going to be using. So you see on the screen here that we listed K, Y, YG, I, B, N, and H. So there are, I think, 8 more codes besides that in the standard, but we are not using those. We're only using these 7. So a K means it's a required change on a SROI. So if you see it in the column for add, update, remove, or delete as a K, that means you need to send us a SROI-02. A Y means it's a required change on a SROI or a SROI, but not both. So it's going to be a SROI-only data element or a SROI-only data element. So whichever kind of data element that is, you send us a SROI-02 or a SROI-02. And then the YG has some exceptions. We're only using it on SROIs. We don't have any YGs on SROIs. So the next screen will get into a little bit more of the exceptions. And if you're looking at the handout that I emailed to you, which we don't really have time to get into in great detail today, but at upcoming monthly trading partner webinars, we will focus more on this reference document. We're just highlighting it today to give you a sense of what the Change 02 process element requirement table means. And for those of you who are familiar with the standard, to give you a sense of the reference document created so that you can go and code the requirements. Many have already implemented this in other jurisdictions, so you're familiar with the concept of these changes, and we tried to put together a reference document for you to make it easier. then the I is required on either the SROI or the SROI, and you determine which one to send us. B, we have it in bold. Earlier I mentioned about the red bolding. This is set by standard. It cannot be changed. If you send it to us, it will be rejected. The N is something that we set. So we put an N in there. We're not going to be allowing changes on that particular type of add, update, remove, or DN for that data element, and we will reject it. And H means you can send it to us if you want to. It's not required, but if you send it, then we will accept it. And please remember, like I said earlier, all these changes have to be noted in DN 412. You need to point out to us that you're making that change. The 1, 2, actually, data elements we really want to call out. Over to the left there, you see DN 06, Insure FEN, and DN 187, Claim Administrator FEN. This is a change from 3.0 to 3.1. Our implementation in 3.0 allows you to change these data elements on a SROI or a SROI, but in 3.1, we're only going to allow those to be changed on a SROI. So that's why we have them labeled as Ks under update. This is the reportable change code YG. Again, it's a partial screenshot of the reference document. If you're looking at the reference document that was sent to you, you can see that starting on page 4, you'll see that there are YGs, mainly in the benefits segment. So once you start getting to the financial processing rules in the benefits segment, that's when you start getting into a lot of rules, and there's conditions that are attached to the number of. That's where you see MC 288A. So there are a lot of exceptions that are listed on the SROI data element requirement table. And again, we're not going into great detail today, but in future webinars we will. This is the section that the IABC Change 02 work group will start looking at the rules. So some of these may change, and if the rules change, then we'll have to change our requirements. But we have set a lot of population restrictions to enforce these rules. Some of them existed in 3.0, and some of the new population restrictions that are on our summary document are new because of the new rules to the Change 02 process. Bottom line is, file the appropriate MTC, don't file an 02 instead of the appropriate MTC. For instance, if you're changing the net weekly amount, you should be filing a CA. You shouldn't be filing a SROI 02 or SROI 02 to do that. And these are some of the population restrictions that we've set to enforce these rules. So these are based on the Section 4 Change 02 processing rules. And one is 412-064, that the number should be reported in that change segment number when it's being changed. This is what I was referencing earlier. And then a new edit on 411. The MTC does not equal the 02, then the number of change elements must be 0. So these are listed on our reference document on page 12. And then this is another population restriction that we're setting on 412 that talks about the record layout in section 2 for the implementation guide, because we need to identify what it is that you're changing on the 02. And that's the idea of the new Change 02 process in Release 3.1. So jurisdictions can determine what it is you're changing, and are you trying to add, update, remove, or delete. So this is viewed as an enhancement to 3.1 to help jurisdictions determine what is being changed. I'm going to turn it back over to Mike at this point.
All right, I am going to speak about the subannual. As I mentioned earlier, when we talk about this, you will hear some mention of proposed regulations. Those will be posted in the near future. And so I would encourage you to follow the website, as well as if you are not signed up for WCB notifications, Any regulation changes, large announcements like that would be announced through the WCB notifications. So the board will be modifying 322 F3. And with that modification, the SROI-SA would be due 180 days from the date of accident. If there's not a full date of accident, then 180 days from the filing date of the initial SROI. You'll notice that this is different than the current requirement. So if DN 299 award order date falls within that first 180 days, the SROI-SA instead is due 180 days from the award order date. That would be the duly filed date of that decision. This is when there's a board direction to continue payments, and it'd be required every 180 days until the continuing payments stop. During the IAIABC training that we did last month, there was a question about continuing payments and what happens if there's another decision with the same rate ordered. Would that date reset? The answer is that no, the date would not reset. You could continue to send them every 180 days. If the case is closed with no continuing payments within the first 180 days, the SA will instead be due 180 days from the initial closure. If the case is reopened within that 6 months of the initial closure, the SROI-SA would then be due 180 days from that subsequent closure, again, if there's no continuing payments. The subsequent summary report. If the case is reopened and an award of additional indemnity with no continuing payments is made, and the case is closed per that notice of decision, the SROI-SA will be due within 180 days from the award order date, the notice of decision duly filed date. Or if the case is reopened and an award is made with no continuing payments and the case remains continued, the SROI-SA would not be due until 180 days from that subsequent closure. If a case is reopened and an award of additional indemnity with continuing payments is made, the SROI-SA again is due 180 days from that award order date where the board directed the continuing payment. And it is then due every 180 days until those continuing payments stop. If the case is closed with no continuing payments more than 180 days from that date of accident, or if there's not a full date of accident, that date of initial SROI, the SROI-SA would be due 180 days from that initial closure. As Mary Beth had discussed earlier, acquisition is something new in the standard, that's SROI-AC.
So, Michael, are you taking questions on the SA? Michael?
As long as it doesn't have to do with a comment on what it should be, yes, we can.
Well, no, I'm just wondering the impact because that's today anyways based on date of accident or injury, and it's automated. Now you're changing all those things around, so difficult, if not automate a lot of those things. So on the diary system type logic, things move around. So how are you guys going to keep track of everything when all those dates move around constantly, and or you're not, or if all of a sudden the essays drop off because now it's manually, somebody has to manually remember to do it versus the machine doing it, that type of stuff. Do you have any edits or audit provide traders say, hey, we're not getting these essays, can you check to see anything like that?
I can check for you on that. I do believe that eventually they will be looking at doing some reporting for that, which should be new. But we can look into that beyond obviously the award order date in there. But For the others, as far as the closure dates and that, we can definitely check into that for you.
And can award order dates? Can you have more than one on a given claim or the life of the claim?
Yes. So you could have it's that award order date's based on the hearing decision. So there could be multiple hearings.
Okay, so whatever the most current award order date is, your 6 month asset report for whatever the most current award order date is.
Correct.
All right. Well, I think it'd be important just to point that out, right? So if I'm 5 months and into the last award order date, and now there's a new one, and I'll have to put the SA out another 6 months, so it might be 11 months before you get it, right? That type of thing.
That is if the payments change. If the payments don't change and they're just still paying you're still paying the same award as always, and they possibly came in for a medical authorization issue, we wouldn't expect you to have to reset the date or anything like that, since it wasn't, the hearing wasn't based on indemnity.
Yeah, we are in the process of creating some FAQs and also a reference document on that. So as Mike said, this is a pending regulation that we're working on. So Mike, I see that we have a couple questions in chat.
There's a couple questions here. One is, what is meant by closed? Is NFA considered closed? Yes, in board terms, for those more familiar with decisions, you probably have ingrained in your memory, no further action at this time. And can we continue to report every 180 days? Yes, we don't have any edits. I know there are folks who auto-trigger things today, even though we don't have a requirement to keep reporting for medical today. We know we do get them from some folks. There's nothing that would ever reject that SROI-SA. The other question is, when do we cease filing the SROI-SA? If there's no continuing payments, they would cease after that last reportable SROI-SA. So we, again, would not expect you to have to continue to report on a case that has no continuing payments and is closed. So for the acquisition, Mary Beth had mentioned that is something new. So within that, there is a new data element as well, DN423. Acquired claim last known indemnity through date on the SROI. It is mandatory conditional on the AC. It is going to be required if employer paid salary prior to acquisition is not equal to E, so you're not paying employer paid benefits. The DN410 acquisition status code, Mary Beth had also mentioned this earlier. This is something new that we'll be returning in the acknowledgement back to you. It'll be returned after you file the AQ or AU. And one of those values is B, SROI due. Benefit types have not ended, and an AP or AC may be due. So with that value, if we return that in the acknowledgement, we would expect either the appropriate AP, acquired payments, if you're picking up payments, or the SROI-AC if their previous administrator had suspended but never filed that suspension. Just a quick knowledge check. I know we've already covered this one. I answer a few questions related to it. How many days from the initial accident is the SROI-SA due? And I see a few answers there already, and B, 180 days is correct. When is the DN423 required? on a SROI. That's the indemnity ceased through date there. And this one is due when DN 203 does not equal E employer paid. Reduced benefit amount code, net to zero. So there is a new event in the release 3.1 standard. For those familiar with New York, it's not new to us, but it is new to the standard, and that's the SROI-RB net to zero. A DN 202 reduced benefit amount code now is a new code Z net to zero. They will be modifying 322, and it will state that reports due within 18 days of a resumption of payments for a disability becoming due in the event payments are not being made due to a credit owed to the carrier. Mailing is required for the SROI-RB. That exists today in 3.0. And for those in New York, very familiar, you actually do this today. You take a credit for a scheduled loss of use where you've paid out in the future, and now that claimant has lost time and you need to report it. Now there's a mechanism within the standard to do so with net to zero. On the edit matrix valid value table for DN 202, we just added Z net to zero to the valid value table for a value that we will take. For those of you familiar with the term quick code reference list, it is now called the valid value table in release 3.1. Reduced benefit amount code, net to zero. A couple new edits. One of those is DN 202. Just to point out, for those not familiar with the standard, that 064 there is an error code within the IAIABC standard. So when you see those codes at the end, it's referencing an error code that we're using from the standards. First new edit is it cannot be claim settled under another data injury unless claim settled under another data injury has been accepted on the ACPY or UR. And the other edit is related to jurisdiction claim number related. Mary Beth will be talking about that field later on in the presentation. That's another new data element. And it should not exist if DN 400 is not the duplicate combined claim or DN 202 is not equal to claim settled under another date of injury. Another new edit for DN2, 065 error. If the SROI-CB has a benefit segment with a reduced benefit amount code of R, D, or Z, then there must be at least one benefit segment with its maintenance type code populated within that A49 record. This is very similar to the standard today. It just says if you're filing the SROI-CB, you'd have to have benefits there unless you're using certain codes. If the SROI-CB does not have a benefit segment of R, D, or Z, then there must be at least two benefit segments within that populated with the A49 record. And again, this exists within the standard today. If you're filing the CB under normal circumstances, you're required to file two event benefits. We modified existing error, number of benefits. It's edited to read if the SROI-CB does not have a reduced benefit amount code of D, N, S, or Z, and does not include DN 226 recovery code of 880. For those of you that are not familiar with 880, That's just voided indemnity benefit check recovery. Then the number of benefits must not be 0 or 1. And again, this goes back to the current standards. There is a question about the RB and mailing required and going over that. That actually exists today in 3.0. The board has mailing requirements. We return PDFs to you. And for the SROI RB today in 3.0, you're required to mail a copy to the claimant and their attorney, if any. We will be continuing that same mechanism within 3.1. We also modified DN 288. Number of benefits is edited to read if it's the SROI-AP, CA, EP, ER, IP, RB, or the SX, and does not have a DN 202 reduced benefit amount code equal to D, N, S, or Z, and does not include a recovery code of 880, then the number of benefits must not be 0. And again, these are very similar. We're adjusting them based on net to 0, but very similar to what exists today. With that, I am going to turn it over to Mary Beth, who's going to talk about reduced earnings and 3.1 changes.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, so reduced earnings has improved in 3.1. We were very happy that there were changes made. New York had done a study on the current reduced earnings in 3.0 and shared it with the IAIABC Claims EDI Committee, participated on the 2 work groups that made the changes for IRR 802 and 857. The SROI-RE MTC has been retired in 3.1, and what they did was they expanded the reduced earnings variable segment on more of the MTCs. We will be applying a new edit on DN 435 for the reduced earnings net weekly amount. It must be 0 unless the 070 BTC is sent to enforce reduced earnings being reported for temporary partial. There are a lot of rules in the Section 4 variable segment population rules, number 2G, specifically about reduced earnings. And it's very important that the variable segment is supposed to be used when the rate varies. So we want to make sure that everybody understands that the benefits segment will represent the most current TP rate and date reported for which benefits are paid. So this is something that we don't see in 3.0 today. So we will definitely be working with everyone in 3.1 to get better reporting. We're very excited that the change is allowing it to be reported on more MTCs, and the new DN will provide us with the weekly rate that is being paid by the claim administrator rather than just the rate that's being paid by the employer. The DN 124 actual reduced earnings in 3.0 today is all we have. But now we're going to have this new DN 435, also reduced earnings net weekly amount due by claim administrator. In 3.0, all we have is DN 242, the reduced earnings week number. So and it really doesn't give us much information. We're going to be changing that to NA in 3.1 because 3.1 is going to give us 2 new data elements to provide us with start and end dates. And those 2 new data elements are DN 414, which is the start date, and 415, which is the end date. So this will be required on the AP, CA, CB, IP, RB, SX, and SU, which are all of the MTCs in which reduced earnings can be reported on, and it'll be required whenever you have the number of reduced earnings greater than 0. And then the element requirement table we have on the SROI is the same thing, the same MTCs that reduced earnings available on will be required, number of reduced earnings greater than 0. So we'll be touching more on this at upcoming monthly webinars. The suspension changes that are rolled out in 3.1 as a result of R3.1 are for modifying all references to the SROI-SX for the various types of maintenance type codes to changing them to the full reason codes. So there'll be one MTC, SROI-SX, and then in its place will be suspension reason codes. And we are looking forward to this because today what happens is the wrong type of suspension is filed, and because of sequencing, you can't fix that because you can't file a suspension after a suspension. But this time with 3.1, you'll be able to file a SROI-02 to correct the reason. So say you file a SROI suspension reason and tell us claimant died, and you meant to really tell us claimant returned to work. Now you'll be able to do a SROI-02 correcting the reason. And this is a problem we see in 3.0 today that will be resolved in 3.1. We are also going to be putting in a new edit on DN418, suspension reason code, and the SX must have suspension reason code of SJ when you're making temporary payments pursuant to 21A. And this is very important for our 21A voluntary payments as posted on our website on the subject matter. If you're paying pursuant to 21A, you should be filing the SJ within 5 days, regardless of any other reason. So even if the claimant returns to work or claimant dies, the SJ is the appropriate suspension reason. So we will be setting an edit on that to force the SJ based on the subject matter. And we will be making DN418 suspension reason code as mandatory on the SROI-SX. The valid values that we will be taking for the suspension reason code are the same values that we take for MTCs in 3.0. So that will be S1, S2, S4, S5, S7, SD, and SJ. So like I said before, the only change from 3.0 to 3.1 is that they're changing from MTC to suspension reason code values. And just like in 3.0, we won't be taking in 3.1 the S3, S6, S8, or S9 because they don't apply to New York rules and regulations. And we also won't be taking the DN419, the partial suspension reason codes, because we don't take SROI-PX in 3.0. The new DN for overpayment in 3.1 is another data element that we are looking forward to. This was actually requested for claim administrators. Today, claim administrators in 3.0 have to send in correspondence requesting an overpayment because there's no such data element in 3.0. So what we've done with this new data element, DN433, is we are creating a new regulation, 300.23G, and if the claim administrator seeks to recover an alleged overpayment, you can file an add update using this data element. So like I said before, we did request this on behalf of claim administrators, so you won't have to file paper anymore. And then when the judge directs it, they will direct you for the recoupment of the overpayment. The SROI-02 is optional, but we just want to make sure everyone knows that if you don't file the SROI-02 at least 10 days before the hearing, the judge may not consider your overpayment. So the SROI-02 is listed on the event table based on the regulation. And DN433, the severity ranking is AR on all the SROIs. Like I said before, it is optional, but it is in your best interest to file it if you want to request recoupment for an overpayment. So a judge will direct it. Okay, the 401 cancel is something that we get a few every week, and today in 3.0, we don't know why you're requesting to cancel. There are no data elements on it. So New York did request that some data elements be added to 3.1, and we have now DN 400, 401, and 402 on 3.1, which will give us the cancel reason code, which will be mandatory. And then if the cancel reason code is D, duplicate combined claim, then you'll be required to give us the JCN claim number that you are saying it should be combined into. And then the cancel reason narrative will be AR, so you can give us more detail of the reason why you are filing the SROI-01 indicating that the case should be canceled. So this will help us because today we have to contact you every time you file a SROI-01. Hopefully with these new data elements, we'll get enough information on it that we won't have to contact you. So there are 4 values in the 3.1 cancel reason code. We are definitely going to be adding D, duplicate claim combined. That's the one I just mentioned, where you then also give us the case number that you want to cancel and combine it with. J, jurisdiction wrong or changed. That's when maybe you meant to file it as a federal claim, longshoreman. And we put in there not required by jurisdiction. However, after we announced that we were going to be adding in, a claim administrator brought to our attention and asked us for some examples, and we looked at that again. We're reviewing it. We're not sure we're going to take that one. We are in the process of looking at some table changes. We do plan on publishing some changes in June. We'll be publishing an eClaims changelog with the changes, and this probably will be one of them. We're probably going to be graying out N. But for right now, N is listed as a valid value, but I think we're probably going to end up graying it out. We don't really see that it fits New York. Definitely R, we knew would not fit New York, and that is grayed out on our table. Okay, current date disability began. There were 2 data elements added to 3.1, 416 and 417. So 416 is the current date employer had knowledge of the current date of disability. That's a SROI and a SROI data element. We are adding that as AR on the MTCs listed. And then 417, current date claim administrator had knowledge of the current date disability. We don't see that this applies to New York, so we are making that NA. Again, a reminder, NA means that if you send it to us, we will ignore it. We won't display it on the paper form. We won't reject it, but we just will ignore it. The next 20 slides are going to cover the new lost time reporting for 3.1. Mike and I represented New York's needs on the IAIABC Claims EDI committee that developed these changes, and we had the Form C11 in mind with the goal to get the in-out reporting. So the Form C11, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is the paper form that we have where the employer fills it out to tell us when the claimant has gone out of work and back in. So it is a form that we continue to receive because it's sent in by the employer, but we were looking for better reporting on our SROIs and SROIs that were coming from the claim administrator. And with this change, we think we're going to be able to get the better reporting. We are building our business information system, and what we expect to do in the future is take this new data that you're going to be giving us and build a table that will give us a clearer picture of the lost time and an in-out type of reporting. Initially, in eCase, you'll just see the new data elements added. But when we expand to our phase 2 of our business information system, you'll see better type of table reporting for the in-out using this data. So DN72 was a SROI data element, and in 3.1 it was added to the SROI. We're making that MC on the 00, 04, and AU. And then we're also modifying the DN72 population restriction and changing it from unless the return to work DN 189 equals R to unless DN 406 latest return to work type code is R. And what this means is that DN 189 return to work type code was retired in 3.1. And what these changes have done is it's taken the return to work type code and it's broken it out into initial return to work type code and latest return to work type code. So DN 189 goes away, and now it becomes DN 403, which is initial return to work type code, and DN 406, which is latest return to work type code. So all we did was we took the existing population restrictions and we modified them to make them work for the 3.1 new data elements that retired the return to work type code and broke them out into initial and latest. So we're lining up all of the initial return to work dates with their corresponding qualifiers for return to work type code, return to work with same employer, and return to work with physical restrictions. So in the upcoming slides, we'll be going through all of those examples. And we set the appropriate population restrictions, DN error message, and the element requirements to match that concept. Can we go to the next slide?
I apologize, Mary Beth. The cell phone cut out.
Okay.
And I just had to disconnect. Sorry.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, and then there were two data elements that had been on the SROI in 3.0. They were also added to the SROI, DN 144 and 145. We are making those AR on the SROIs. And then I mentioned earlier about DN 403 becoming initial return to work type code. That's where the DN 189 retired. And we just realigned the existing population restriction to make it fit with the new data element. So we took the initial return to work date, DN 68, and lined it up with the DN 403 initial return to work type code. And then we also did it on the SROI. We lined it up, initial return to work type code with initial return to work date or the latest. So they're not really new data elements and requirements. They are just modifying them from 3.0 to 3.1 using the new data elements for the initial return to work type codes. Then we put out there that it was going to have a condition on the suspension that the return to work type code was required when the suspension reason code is S1, S2, or S7. If you look out on our tables, you'll also see S5, which was a requirement in release 3.0. But we never have, we still have it on there. We don't have a problem with it on an S5 incarceration, but when we presented it on our 3.1 table, a claim administrator brought it to our attention and asked, why would you want a return to work type code if the claimant you're suspending because of incarceration? And we do agree with that. So we are going to pull the requirement on the S5 that will be included in the changes that we'll be publishing in June. So on this slide, you'll see that the S5 is not listed. And then the physical restriction indicator that I mentioned earlier is the qualifier. So this breaks out the retired physical restriction indicator DN 224 and 3.0 and breaks it out to the initial 404 And then later we'll talk about the latest return to work physical restriction indicator 407. And then the initial return to work physical restriction indicator will be required if the initial return to work type code is present. And then DN 405, the initial return to work with the same employer. That is a breakout from the DN 228 that got retired in 3.1. We have initial 405, and then also later we'll talk about 408, which is the latest. And again, we just took it and broke it out to be the new data elements. And 405, initial return to work with same employer, we have it as a condition required based on initial return to work type code is actual. Again, same thing as we have on 3.0 today, just breaking it out to be the new data element. And 405, initial return to work with same employer, required on the suspension if it's S1, 2, or 7. And this is another one that we had the 5 in there, the S5. If you look at our tables, it'll say S5, but we're going to pull that based on a claim administrator bringing it to our attention that it just doesn't make sense to require it for incarceration. Okay, now we're going to talk about the latest return to work reporting. So just like the initial return to work data elements, we've set conditions for the latest return to work data element requirements. You probably get the idea here that we're just lining up the latest return to work with same employer with the latest return to work type code. And then the latest return to work with the same employer indicator is being lined up and required with the suspensions S1, 2, and 7 when the latest return to work type code is actual. And then the latest return to work with same employer is required when the latest return to work type code is actual. Latest return to work type code required if the latest return to work status date is present. So we're lining up the latest return to work type code with the latest return to work status date. And then in 406, we have the latest return to work type code is required with the latest return to work status date is present. And then the latest return to work physical restriction indicator is required if the latest return to work status date is present. One more. Okay, latest return to work physical restriction indicator is required if latest return to work type code is present. So that gives you an idea just how we're realigning all of the lost time reporting requirements. So here's a population restriction that we removed. The initial date disability began and the initial return to work must be the same as previously reported on the O2. So we're pulling that population restriction because the DP rule changed in 3.1. So it's not only something that you must update on in O2, you can update this date on other MTCs as well. We still do have the population restriction in place though. If the initial date disability began as present, then all benefit period start dates being sent other than 30 and 500 must be equal to or after. So I just want to remind everybody that that population restriction still exists. We did modify 189 must be greater than 0 and added 2 population restrictions for 403 and 406. again, due to the retirement of 189 and the addition of 403 for initial and 406 for latest. And then we added some new population restrictions for 403, 404, and 405. Same concept to replace the ones that we had 3.0 for the old retired data elements. Okay, at this point, I'm going to pass it back over to Mike.
Thank you, Mary Beth. I wanted to go over some of the changes to the standard for dependent information and how New York is applying those. One of those data elements is DN 425, dependent first name. That's a SROI data element. And it'd be mandatory conditional on all except the AC, CD, and SA. And it'd be required when that dependent payee relationship code is present. And DN 426, dependent last name, has the same condition as first name. Another new data element, dependent date of birth, DN 427. So again, that's going to be required when it's not the ACCD or SA, and when dependent payee relationship code is present. A couple of other new data elements that we are not taking in New York. One of those is dependent gender code, and the other is dependent extent of dependency. Both of those are grayed out on our valid values table. Population restrictions. As Mary Beth mentioned, some of the data elements have been moved around. One of those is the number of death-dependent pay relationships. That's DN 424. Must be 0 on the SROI-CD. For those familiar with the standard, the SROI-CD is the compensable death, but you're investigating if there's any dependents. And the other is it should be greater than 0 if the benefit type code is 010 or 210, and the death result of injury equals Y with employee dependents greater than 0 due to that data element number change. Couple other changes, claim administrator, claim representative, DN 137, claim administrator, claim rep, business phone number was added to the SROI. It will be mandatory on the 00, 04, and AU, and AR on the AQ and UR per the standard. DN 138, claim administrator, claim rep, email address. That was also added to the SROI and has the same conditions as DN 137. Claim administrator fax number, that was actually retired in 3.1, so that will no longer be there. And DN 140, claim administrator, claim rep name was added to the SROI as well, and has the same conditions as email and phone number. Another data element we had talked about earlier that was added to the standard is DN 401, jurisdiction claim number related. Has a couple different purposes. One of those is if you're settling a case. DN 401, it's mandatory conditional on the AC, PY, and UR. And the condition is it'd be required when reduced benefit amount code equals S, which is claim settled under another date of injury. We talked about part of body earlier. There's also some changes related to permanent impairment for release 3.1. One of those as well, for those that report in 3.0, you probably know if you report leg or arm and that claimant happens to have a schedule on both of them, you can only report up to 100% today. That does change with 3.1. They have DN 432, permanent impairment body part location code. It will be mandatory conditional, and the condition is it's required when that permanent impairment body part code equals the code as listed in the location codes, which are found in section 6 of the implementation guide for the IAIABC. That permanent impairment body part location code, very similar to the other body part code, has bilateral left and right now, so you can let us know. Another change is DN 436, partial denial effective date. That will be mandatory on the partial denials. Other new New York or other new R3.1 data elements that we are not using here in New York. One of those is DN 437, the employee tax ID number. Another is 438, collective bargaining agreement. And the last one is 409, weekly income amount for offset. Those three New York will not be accepting. Just a chance for a quick knowledge check here. If the claim administrator would like to have an overpayment entertained at the hearing, how many days prior to the hearing? And I see a bunch of 10s in the answers and Cs, and that is correct. It is 10 days prior to the hearing if you would like to have it entertained by that judge at the hearing. We also wanted to go over modifications to the element requirement table. We talked a lot about new data elements and some population restriction changes. We wanted also to go over some things that were modified. One of those modifications is jurisdiction claim number. That changed from mandatory conditional to mandatory on the SROI-AP. That is actually set per the standard, so we adjusted our table to match the IAIABC standard. DN 72, latest return to work status date was changed from AR to MC on the SROI-AP, and that condition is required when the employee returns to work after a subsequent period. DN 134, calculated weekly compensation amount, was changed to AR to MC on that SROI partial denial. It's required if number of benefits on the SROI or any previously accepted SROI is greater than 0. DN 144, current date disability began, was also changed from AR to MC. And it was changed on the SROI, ER, and RB. The condition is it's required unless DN 202 reduced to benefit amount code is equal to Z net to 0. And lastly, DN 281, initial date employer had knowledge of data disability, was changed from MC to AR on the SROI-AP. Again, we did that to match the standard and the severity rankings. That is the maximum allowable for that data element. We also wanted to go over the valid value table and valid value detail page a little bit, just to highlight a couple things. Again, a reminder from earlier, for those familiar, quick code reference list is what we call it today in release 3. So for maintenance type code, the valid value table, we added the SROI-AC and SROI-SU. The SROI-UR and SROI-UR, the grandfathered, are both accepted. Grayed out on the valid value table is the SROI and SROI-UR for update report, as well as the SROI-NT narrative. We also removed SROI with the little x. And what we mean by that is the SROI-S1 through SJ. Since that is now the SROI-SX and you're using suspension codes, we just removed those other suspension MTCs. For agreement to compensate code, we grayed out S, T, and U. And for accident premise code, we added our employee residence and other. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mary Beth to talk about the error message table.
All right, so the DN error message table is the first worksheet on the edit matrix, and this allows us to apply the standard edits. You'll find on your 3.0 to 3.1 reference document, pages 10 and 11, a screenshot of the DN error message table for DNs 400 through 436, the new DNs, and the edits that we will be applying to those. As far as the error 037, that was added as part of IR 882 that allows jurisdictions to add this error must be less or equal to the maintenance type code date to specific data elements. We have chosen to apply them to DN 29, 61, 196, 199, and 281, as well as some current data elements, DN 416, 423, and 427. And this is listed on page 7 of the summary handout. Another new expansion as part of 882 IRR was the error 041 must be less or equal to current date. We are going to be applying it to existing data elements 29, 61, 196, and 199, as well as the new 3.1 data element 414. And this is also listed on page 7 of the reference document. 3.1 is removing error 130, and it is replacing it with error 120. It broke it out into 120 and 121. So we'll be applying 120, no embedded spaces, to 187 and 314. This is also on page 7 of the reference document. And then error 120, which is for no leading spaces, we are applying it to the DNs that you see on the screen here, which is summarized on page 7 and 8 of the reference document. And then it continues on. We're applying 121 actually to quite a few. So you'll see that it's slide 116, 117, 118. So we have 3 slides that list them all, which include the 3 new data elements, 402, 425, and 426. So we have a long list of those in our reference document. We also, as part of 3.1, there are a few new errors added, error 122, 123, and 124. So we will be applying error 122 to DN 415, reduced earnings week end date, and that's on page 9. We're applying error 123, which is invalid change reason code, to DN 412. And we are applying the new error 124, no recognizable change found, to DN 411 and 412. New error 125 must be greater than 0 for delete will be applied to DN 74, DN 277, 283, and the new 420 number of body part injured. So that just enforces the deletion rules that we have on our element requirement table. And then new error 126 will be applied to many data elements. And you'll find that on page 9 of your reference document. And this is number of occurrences previously reported for DN 413 change reason. So a lot of the number counters, including the new number counters, 420, 424, 434. And this is very important to enforce the rules in section 4, the change processing rules, to understand how the edits are going to be applied. Okay, the sequencing table we referenced on page 11 of the summary document. We're not making a lot of changes to our sequencing table. Those of you who are familiar with the IAIABC standard table know that we've never used the standard table. We created our own version in 3.0. We carried it over to 3.1. However, Patty Gray and I are participating in the Systems Committee Sequencing Work Group, which is developing a new table. And for those of you who attended the Systems EDI presentation by Robbie Tanner at the Systems Committee, you caught a glimpse of what that work group is doing and how they're redesigning the IABC sequencing table. So once the IABC publishes that new standard table, New York will publish the new standard table. So the only change that we made on our sequencing table was to relax the edit to allow a CB after an IP. This was requested by a claim administrator, and it is currently being discussed by the Claims EDI Committee under IRR 899 to clarify the definition for CB. And then also we put a new edit in for sync up, explaining that it's only going to be accepted upon request and approval by the eClaims work group. I had mentioned that earlier about the sync up process. And if the request is not approved and you submit a sync up, then it will be rejected as an invalid sequence with the element error text with the new code listed as Z on our sequencing table, that the sync up needs to be pre-approved first. We did add the AC, the new MTC AC, to our sequencing table, allowed if the last accepted SROI is an AQ or AU, and allowed if the last accepted SROI is an 04 or UR. And then what we did with the SX change is we just followed the same sequencing rules that we had in the past with the S1, S2, and the other S's, but we just broke them down into the full suspension types. Okay, we did add some population restriction rules, and these are listed on our reference document on pages 11 through 13. There's just a few that we want to call out to bring to your attention. These first two I had mentioned earlier when we talked about the change 02. DN06, the insurer FEN can only be changed on a FROI 02, and claim administrator FEN can only be changed on a FROI 02. So in 3.0, we do allow it to be changed on a FROI 02 and a SROI 02, but in 3.1, we're only going to allow it to be changed on the FROI 02. We also added a new edit for DN 281, must be on or after the initial date disability began. We're modifying the calculated weekly comp amount that it can only be on certain MTCs to include PD and sync up. And we are also modifying the net weekly amount that it can only be on certain MTCs to include the sync up. So we're adding sync up in there. Since we're adopting sync up, we're just going to follow the rules of the standard and allow them to be changed on the sync up. Okay, we're just gonna put in a little knowledge check here before we wind down. And question number 1, what were the edits made to error 041 on the DN error message table? This was per IRR 882. So it was on a previous slide there. There were 5 edits listed. And don't know if anybody has that to go back to, but I can just let you know that those were our DN 29, policy effective date, DN 61, employee date of hire, DN 196, denial rescission date, DN 199, full denial effective date, and DN 414, reduced earning week start date. And so, oh, people are already answering question number 2. I'm glad to see you are right on that. This is very important. Additional population restriction states new edit, DN 006, that's the insurer FEN, can only be changed on. And yep, that's the SROI 02. So we will not be allowing it on the SROI 02, only the SROI 02. So good job, everyone. Okay, at this point, I am going to pass it back to Mike to wrap it up.
Thank you, Mary Beth. So we just wanted to recap today with you before we ended today. Just a reminder that today's takeaways, most important one, that the implementation date on March 15, 2021. Register for the monthly webinars. We are going to continue to do those monthly webinars that Mary Beth is very well known for. With that, in addition to emailing the eClaims admins as we do today in business contacts, we will also be using the WCB notifications as well. You can locate those in the lower right-hand corner of the board website. And lastly, have a system readiness plan. Prepare for that migration, modify your program. And again, we are here for resources and questions. A couple important ones I just want to remind folks about is those BPR and BIS updates. You can sign up on our website. You can sign up for WCB notifications. And always remember that any important eClaims announcements like the webinars, we will still continue to send out those email blasts to the admins and business contacts, as well as post those in the IAIABC jurisdictional news and EDI general interest. And we want to leave you with a couple email addresses there. Please continue to send your existing Release 3 questions to eclaims@wcb.ny.gov. Anything 3.1 related, you can send to us directly at eclaims31@wcb.ny.gov. With that, I will open it up for questions if folks have, but thank you for attending today. And again, any questions you think of, that eClaims31 mailbox is there to ask, as well as those monthly webinars. And again, that next one is May 19th. So it is out there on the website if you would like to sign up. Thank you again for attending.